A couple of years ago, I went trekking in the remote mountains of the Pacific Northwest. It was an isolated route, known for its raw beauty and challenging terrain. I'd been planning it for months, a multi-day trek that passed through remote villages and untouched wilderness. The trail I chose wasn't one of the popular ones. It was a lesser-known route that locals had warned about. After all, ghost stories are common in mountain regions. The first 2 days were uneventful. The landscape was breathtaking. Snow-capped peaks in the distance, alpine meadows, and dense forests that stretched for miles. I passed a few shepherds and their flocks on the way, but as I climbed higher, the trail became lonelier. By the third day, I was completely on my own. The trail wound along a ridge, narrow and uneven, with steep drops on one side. Clouds were rolling in, and the wind carried an eerie chill. I checked my map frequently, making sure I was on track. Around noon, I noticed something strange: stacked stones forming a small cairn in the middle of the trail. It wasn't unusual to see cairns in the mountains, but this one felt off. It was taller than normal, almost human height, and placed directly in the center of the path, as if blocking the way. Curiosity got the better of me. I examined the stones more closely and noticed strange markings carved into them, symbols I didn't recognize. The air around it felt colder, and an odd silence had settled over the forest. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive quiet. I felt a sudden urge to move on, so I stepped around the cairn and kept going. A few hours later, the fog started rolling in. At first, it was thin and wispy, but soon it became so dense that I could barely see a few feet ahead. The trail became harder to follow, and I found myself stopping every few minutes to check my compass. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, like someone walking behind me. I stopped in my tracks, straining to listen. The sound stopped too. I looked back, but the fog was too thick to see anything. I called out, thinking it might be another trekker, but my voice echoed back at me, unnaturally distorted. The uneasiness I'd been feeling since I passed the cairn grew stronger. As I kept walking, the sound started again, soft footsteps, keeping pace with mine. It wasn't just the sound of boots crunching on the trail. There was something else, like the faint swish of fabric. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the fog. Nothing. The trail behind me was empty. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding. The footsteps grew louder, closer. My mind raced with explanations. An animal? Another trekker? But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice. It was faint at first, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It sounded like a woman, her voice laced with desperation. "Help me, please help me." I froze. The voice was so close, as if someone was standing right next to me. But there was no one there. I forced myself to move, practically running now, though the uneven trail made it dangerous. The voice followed me, growing louder and more insistent. "Don't leave me. Please, don't leave me." I glanced over my shoulder, and through the fog, I saw it, a figure, barely visible but undeniably there. It was a woman, her outline blurred by the mist. She wasn't walking but gliding, her movements unnaturally smooth. Her head was tilted, and her dark eyes locked onto mine. Panic surged through me, and I ran. The trail was slippery and treacherous, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away. As I descended the ridge, the voice faded, and the fog began to lift. I didn't stop running until I reached a flatter part of the trail. My legs were shaking, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I thought I was safe, but then I saw it. Another cairn, identical to the one I'd seen earlier, standing ominously on the path. My stomach churned. I didn't remember passing this before. Had I gone in circles? As I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I felt it again, that overwhelming sense of being watched. This time, I didn't wait. I skirted around the cairn and kept going, refusing to look back. I didn't stop until I reached a small village at the base of the trail late that evening. The villagers were surprised to see me. They said no one had trekked that route in years, not since a group of climbers disappeared there during a snowstorm. I don't know if what I saw that day was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. But I do know this: I've never felt fear like that before, and I haven't set foot on a remote trail alone since. A few years ago, my two friends Liam, Clara, and I decided to trek through a lesser-known mountain range in the Western Ghats. We were avid hikers, drawn to remote and unexplored trails. This one was particularly alluring, a secluded route leading to a panoramic viewpoint known as Echo Peak. Few had attempted it, especially during monsoon season, but we wanted the thrill and the adventure. The trek started off beautifully. The trail wove through dense forests, cascading waterfalls, and lush green cliffs. The cool, misty air was refreshing, and the only sounds were our laughter and the rustling of leaves underfoot. We planned to reach the viewpoint by late afternoon, camp there, and descend the next morning. At the last village before the trailhead, an elderly man warned us not to take this path after dusk. "People have gone missing," he said, his voice low and serious. "The forest doesn't forgive carelessness." We dismissed his words as folklore, chalking it up to exaggerated stories meant to scare tourists. The first few hours were uneventful but challenging. As we climbed higher, the terrain became steeper and muddier, with jagged rocks and narrow ledges. Around noon, a heavy fog rolled in, swallowing the landscape. At first, it was enchanting, like walking through a dream. But as the mist thickened, the trail markers became harder to spot. By 3 p.m., we realized we were lost. The trail ahead was completely obscured, and when we turned around to backtrack, the path we'd taken earlier seemed to have disappeared. It wasn't just overgrown. It looked like no one had walked there for years. Panic set in as we realized the sun was already beginning to set. Desperately, we checked our map and GPS, but they offered no clarity. Even our phones were failing. the screens glitching and batteries draining faster than usual. We decided to keep moving downhill, reasoning that it would eventually lead us back to the base. After another hour of aimless wandering, we stumbled upon something unexpected. A small wooden hut nestled in a clearing. It looked ancient, with a sagging roof, rotting planks, and moss creeping up the walls. There was no sign of life, but the sight of shelter was a relief. Liam knocked on the door, but there was no response. We pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was sparse. A single wooden bench, a rusted lantern, and a faint smell of damp earth. We decided to rest there until the fog cleared. Clara and I sat on the bench while Liam paced, peering out the window. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally. We didn't hear the usual forest sounds. No birds, no crickets, just an oppressive silence. Around 6 p.m., Liam said he saw a faint light through the fog, further down the slope. "It might be a village," he said, grabbing his flashlight. "I'll go check it out." We protested, but he was insistent. "I'll be right back," he said, and disappeared into the mist. Minutes turned into an hour, then 2. Liam didn't come back. Clara and I decided to look for him. As we stepped outside, we froze. The hut was gone. Where we had been sitting for hours was now just an open patch of forest, overgrown with shrubs and moss. We shouted Liam's name, our voices echoing eerily in the mist. Clara started crying, and I felt a cold dread settle in my chest. We searched for him until nightfall, but there was no trace, no footprints, no sound, nothing. Exhausted and terrified, we decided to camp in the open and resume the search at first light. Neither of us slept. Every shadow, every rustle felt like a threat. When dawn broke, the fog lifted slightly, and we retraced our steps as best we could. By late afternoon, we stumbled into the base village, exhausted and defeated. We immediately reported Liam's disappearance to the local authorities. When we described the hut, the villagers fell silent. One of them, the same elderly man who had warned us earlier, spoke gravely. "That hut doesn't exist. Many have described seeing it before they disappeared. It's the forest's way of trapping you." He told us about the legend of the forest's trap, a place where time and reality twisted, luring travelers into its grasp. Those who stayed too long were never seen again. He claimed the mountain had a spirit that didn't tolerate intrusion, especially from those who ignored its warnings. We joined the search party, scouring the area for days, but there was no sign of Liam or the hut. Eventually, we had to accept the unthinkable. He was gone. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memory. I've given up trekking, and Clara moved to the city, unable to bear the guilt and fear. Sometimes, in my dreams, I see that hut again. Its door ajar, a faint light inside, and I hear Liam's voice calling me, but I never go in.